Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's post-agenda meeting on the City of Pittsburgh's educational emergency. I want to, first of all, talk about the members of council who are here. We have the President of Council, Teresa Kell Smith, Daniel Lavelle, who is the co-sponsor of this legislation, and Bobby Wilson. Today, we will be joined, and they're joined by Dr. Anthony Hamlet, who is Superintendent of Schools, and Sylvia Wilson, who is the board president. And so the reason we're having this post agenda, this is our third or fourth, actually, in a series of meetings on post agenda meetings. Councilman Lavelle and I introduced legislation calling for an educational emergency in the city of Pittsburgh. Before COVID, there was an existing racial achievement gap in the public school system. Recently, we introduced legislation declaring a state of emergency to specifically bring our community together to address this achievement gap. The achievement gap for African American students is dramatic and concerning. I won't say all the data, we've talked about that before. However, we'll just use a couple of things as an example. For example, in English at third grade, only 38.5% of African American students were proficient compared to 75.7% of white students. And then in fifth and eighth grade, those numbers of proficiency actually go down. Same thing in math. In math, third graders were 32.7%. African American students were proficient compared to 63.1% of white students. And again, in fifth and eighth grade, those students go down. That gap also is consistent in high school. And now COVID has only exacerbated the existing problems. We know the remote learning has been especially hard on Black students. Disproportionately, Black students have essential worker parents who may be unable to provide educational support at home. Black people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic health-wise, and Black students have had a particularly difficult time adjusting to online learning. And we know there was a number of students who just did not log in. And so we're having these conversations to determine, A, if we're right, this is something that we should, as a whole community, partner together to address. And today, we're having a conversation with the officials from the Pittsburgh Public Schools. We are excited and grateful to have with us Dr. Anthony Hamlet, who's the Superintendent of Schools, and we have Sylvia Wilson, who is the board president and who will be representing the entire board in this conversation. Welcome to our post-agenda meeting. And so we ask now that you would certainly introduce yourselves, give any opening statements and any presentations you have to us.
Thank you, Reverend Burgess. I'm Sylvia Wilson, president of the school board. No one could have predicted or prevented the COVID-19 pandemic. Pittsburgh was not alone, facing fast, unavoidable decisions. The PPS board was consistent from day one on the safe return of students, teachers, and staff to our buildings as soon as possible. We were proud to make it to the end of the school year with a different but actual in-person commencements. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exacerbated the systematic educational inequities within our region, but we continue to stand firmly behind our district administration as they swiftly move to implement a transformative strategic plan called Imagine PPS to achieve true equity and to put an end to the impact of racial inequities across our system. Nothing can be eliminated or transformed within a few months or even within 1 year. But to correct inconsistencies and to lead our students and community towards innovative technology and modernization, we must allow the process to move, to be given a chance to institute the plan, to share how far we've come, where we are right now, and where we want to go. We will now hear from Dr. Hamlet, our school superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. And I'm Dr. Anthony Hamlet, Superintendent of Pittsburgh Public Schools. Thank you for having us. We appreciate being here to discuss where we are, where we were before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now post-pandemic, where we are as well. And so with that being said, we'll get started. And I want to say, you're right, Ms. Wilson. Our district is ready to urgently, immediately, and expeditiously move forward toward innovation for our students and transform Pittsburgh Public Schools to the future of learning. But before we talk about our futures, it's important to understand where we've been as a district. The headlines in the news only capture a fraction of our story. The impact of COVID-19, the return to in-person learning, the academic achievement gap with Black Americans, African-American students are our highest priority. So we approach the work using a student-centered design and approach to redesigning our system. We know, and we discuss publicly and privately, that our system is perfectly designed to get the results that we are currently getting. And I'm going to repeat that. As we look at our data, as Reverend Burgess just talked about, as Ms. Wilson just talked about, there's a gap, there's an achievement gap. Some may call the opportunity gap between our African-American students and minority students and our white students. However, to change that, we must look at the system. And therefore, our system, based on our data, is perfectly designed to get the results that we're getting. And if we don't change that system, we'll continue to get the same results over and over again. Now, I might add, some may think that the system is just Pittsburgh Public Schools, but the system is the entire city of Pittsburgh and its ecosystem. Why? Children are born into the city, and they need support from the very beginning. We know some areas, we know some families, some communities are not getting that support they need for their children to be ready to learn and go into pre-K or kindergarten on grade level. And so as we look at that, we definitely want to look at collaborative approaches to work together to that end. Our goal is to have a modernized public education system that serves all students, irregardless of their zip code. Meaning, wherever you are in the city of Pittsburgh, you will get the same high quality, equitable education anywhere, any school that you attend in Pittsburgh Public Schools. Slide. Where were we before the pandemic? So let's take a look. As Ms. Wilson said, we were in development of Imagine PPS, our second strategic plan under my leadership that coincides with the sunset and ending of Expect Great Things. What we want to do is imagine a citywide approach. You good? Your citywide approach is the initiative, right? Our platform was and remains, PPS cannot and will not accept the status quo. So in order to graduate students who are prepared for the jobs of the future in this region as well, and in Pennsylvania and in this nation and around the world, we must take bold steps to align our vision with the current reality of which we live in. The Imagine PPS launch corresponds with the sunset, again, of the district's current strategic plan, Expect Great Things. And so to design, what we want to do is to design an educational delivery model that aligns with the values of our community. Doing that to ensure all students are prepared to succeed in college, career, and life. As I said previously, we are endeavoring to use a citywide approach to help us achieve our goal of a modernized public education system that serves all students regardless of their zip code. But we need more stakeholders to actively support this vision. And that's us wrapping our arms around our children and communities of Pittsburgh Public Schools. That's both the school system, the legislative system in the city as well, the city council, the mayor's office, anybody who has a vested interest and is a stakeholder in making sure that we support all of our students, but especially our Black and brown students who are not performing high enough, wrap our arms around them, working together to make change for our children. And again, we can't do it alone. Well, around Imagine PPS work, these are some of our partners, our community partners that partner with us on our design teams. I'm not going to say the names because I'm sure some of these, all the faces are familiar to you. But again, showing and highlighting the work we've done around Imagine and really being collaborative and engaging with stakeholders, purposely making sure that we have champions for our teams. So Imagine PPS design team components. So each particular box is a team. And so we have a design team around student pathways, positive student experience, underperforming school strategy, new school program design. That is done publicly and collaboratively. However, there are some systems that we work internally. Those systems, and we look at systems and structural changes internally around technology enhancements, school funding model, or I should say, an equitable school funding model based on student need, capital plan, district footprint, magnet pathways, and looking at feeder patterns. Slide. And that coalesces into us creating, or actually it was created before my arrival, but we went out back to the public based on our current context and updated our graduate profile. That graduate profile is that child, is that young adult that we want to graduate into the public system after attending Pittsburgh public schools. That graduate, what do we want that graduate to be? What skill sets, dispositions, soft and hard skills do we want the children to have, or the young adults to have, as they go into college, career, or life with the armed forces? So let's take a look at our fiscal responsibility, talking about finances. Fiscal responsibility, let's start with the basics. Now, how our $671.3 million budget is funded. And you see the pie chart there. These are our big buckets. You're looking at real estate, earned income tax, special education state reimbursement, basic instructional subsidy, and other, which you see in the legend on the left-hand side. Slide. One of the biggies that we want to push around this collaboration and this idea around supporting Pittsburgh public schools and the students in the community is to restore the earned income tax, or IET, school district portion. So let me take you back a little bit. In 2004, Act 187 was introduced by Harrisburg legislation. This forced PPS to give up 1/8 of its share of the INT, earned income tax, to the city when they were in financial distress. This year alone, we're due to give the city a divert from Pittsburgh Public Schools, $20 million alone. Over the course of, since 2004, it's total over $200 million that has been diverted to the city. Now, we want to be very clear. We're not asking for $200 million back. What we're asking for to begin the conversation to end the diversion of the INT tax. Why? The city is out of Act 47. It has high revenues, has a high fund balance. So that's something that will definitely support and help with the things we need for our children and our faculty and staff to maximize education for our children. Slide. Talking about financial stewardship. How do we spend the money? Right? How do we spend, and what do we spend $607 million on? And so we have our big buckets here on the left. School-based funding, the majority, a lion's share of the budget goes to school-based funding, goes to schools. Then we have departmental budgets, that will be central office and operations, but also we have some fixed costs as well. And you see to the right, it's further broken down. Salaries and benefits make up the majority of how we spend the money. Then we go into charter schools at 16%, special education, debt service, transportation, and 9 other. Slide. We are addressing our finances. So reduced costs due to the pandemic has resulted in a lower than projected deficit for 2020. However, lower by a small bit. The projected deficit will be $39.4 million in 2021, and we cannot continue to run a deficit. What we want to do is maximize our district resources by leveraging cost savings and staffing and vacancies, new allocation formula for schools, structuring PPS to meet the needs and build capacity for district success. I also want to, looking at long-range facilities master plan, we want to modernize the district footprint to support facility renovation, innovative school design. And lastly, we are vulnerable to changes in the state and local funding, meaning commercial real estate appeals due to the pandemic. And lastly, future changes in state funding. This shows the growth in charter school expenditures over time since 2013, and it has gone up markedly every year by and large. And you can see the huge difference between 2013 and 2020 in the charter expenditures from Pittsburgh Public Schools has to support the charter schools in the city of Pittsburgh. Slide. So looking at charter school funding inequities, the school expenditures are 106 million that we actually spend on charter school. Charter school costs are increasing at rates that are disproportionate to the increase in the percentage of students enrolled in charter schools. Charter school enrollment increased by 33% since 2013. Charter school tuition expenses increased by 135% since 2013. Charter school funding formula is not based on how much charters spend to educate students. The formula is based on how much a sending district spends to educate students. Charter schools are exempt from the tiered special education charter funding formula that is the other school districts are held to. Slide. How can Harrisburg, our legislation in Harrisburg, how can they fix the charter school funding inequities? These are some ideas. Align cyber charter school tuition rates to actual costs will save PPS over $10.5 million a year. Aligning special education funding to charter schools with charter school expenditures will save PPS over $4.7 million per year. Charter school funding, double dip. The charter funding formula is based on the prior year expenditures, including tuition paid to charter schools. Slide. So back to school 2021-2022. We have every intention to open 5 days a week, bringing our students back to in-person learning. However, we do have options for those individuals that want to stay online. We have an option for grades 4 through 12, if they choose so, to go to Pittsburgh Online Academy. Our safety plan is on our website and is updated and current and consistent with the CDC guidelines. We also continue to find solutions to overcome the national transportation crisis and lack of bus drivers. And I can tell you, even in the best of times, transportation has always been a problem. This is not new and it's not unique to Pittsburgh, this transportation issue that we're dealing with. Slide. All right, changes to the 2021-2022 school environment. Number one, district technology upgrades. We're looking at network upgrades across the district, especially since we're one-to-one district. So we need to upgrade our networks to make sure they're running efficiently and there's no downtime in our broadband access. Staff and student computers. We're pretty much a one-to-one district at this point. Classroom upgrades. We're looking at putting projectors and whiteboards in our classrooms. Cleaning supplies, making sure we stock up on electrostatic sprayers, disinfection solutions and wipes, but also filtering and supplies improvement for HEPA air purifiers. And lastly, maintenance and upgrades, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning upgrades as well. We are receiving approximately in a third round of ESSER funding, $100 million. And we have, as we have always done under my leadership in Pittsburgh Public Schools, been highly inclusive, highly engaging, and going out and doing community engagement and listening sessions on a regular basis. And ESSER requires that, but we've already committed to that. And this takes a look at what we're currently doing, our engagement sessions. There are some that people and individuals can still attend, but we want to make sure we did this as well. This chart is just showing what we're doing administratively, but there's a resolution brought forth by a board member, Kevin Carter, to have a public stakeholder advisory committee as well. So we're doing as much as we can to be inclusive and hear the voices of our community on the needs of our children moving forward to this new school year and beyond. Collaboration is the big word and everything there in between, but that's what it's about. And we're so glad that we had this opportunity to come before the city council to bring you up to speed on where Pittsburgh public schools are, the past, present, and future, where we're going. But we know part of that future, we want high collaboration with our city council, the mayor's office, and the city at large in Pittsburgh to really transform and support our children in Pittsburgh public schools. So these are some ways that we can collaborate. We have opportunities for you to join the Imagine PPS Collaborative, join the PPS in Harrisburg to end the diversion of EIT funds or earned income tax funds and to fix the charter school funding inequities, provide additional funds for early childhood spots, after school programs, and local organizations active in our school communities, coordinate programming between recreation centers with schools, engage neighborhoods in building community safety programs, and increase affordable housing options for families, create a pipeline for PPS students to enter city employment. And lastly, advertise our board meetings to help residents stay informed. These are just a few suggestions as we collaborate, but I'm sure you have ideas as well, and we look forward to that conversation and collaboration. Now it's time for discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you, Reverend Burgess.
All right, thank you very much for that overview. And so we're going to start with Councilman Lavelle, who is co-author of the co-sponsor of the legislation and co-moderator of this conversation. Mr. Lavelle.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Hamlet, for being here. Thank you, Ms. Wilson, for being here. We certainly appreciate having you and being a part of the conversation. The very last slide you put up actually solves a lot of the questions I was had. I was going to ask you, what ways did you believe we could help collaborate with the school district? And so I did take a picture of it for my own reference so that we can begin figuring out how to work on that.
And we can certainly provide this presentation to the city council as well. The entire
Okay.
Yep.
That'd be great. My first question is, in the Reimagining Pittsburgh plan, what is the strategy within that plan to try to begin to address the achievement gaps that have been so pervasive over the last few decades?
Well, one of the things we're doing, well, several things we're doing. Number one, we know we need additional support. We're looking at putting funds in our schools to have robust after-school programming, in-school tutoring, and after-school tutoring as well. Possibly looking at Saturday school sessions as well as an option. But also, really, as we look at the research and the suggestions and guidance, one of the big things we talk about, oftentimes people talk about interventions, and that's one thing that we don't want to do. And so you cannot intervene your way out of poor core instruction. That's the first time instruction that's delivered by the teacher in the classroom. So by doubling down on how we support our faculty and staff in the delivery of instructional and content they need to do that, and also providing them robust on-time curriculum for them to use to support our students, is some of the ways that we're looking at really changing Pittsburgh public schools. But ultimately, those are just some ideas from us. Number one, going back to our engagement, that is important. We want to hear the voices of others out there as well in this engagement activity to begin to inform us of what some of those ideas are that we can implement in Pittsburgh public schools to support further growth and closing this achievement gap between our African-American students and our white students.
Thank you. You mentioned Saturday school, which leads me to another question. Well, first, were we able to track or monitor or have any sense of how much learning loss occurred over the last year because kids weren't in the schools?
I'm going to, I'm gonna say this first. One of the things that we're dealing with is that we haven't taken the PSSA. And again, we know we don't like standardized tests, but that's what we're measured on, right? That was a big measure in looking at the progress of our children in reading, math, and science. And so we haven't had that test in 2 years now. So we are required to take the PSSA, and we're going to take it in the fall. And just a note on that, when it comes to taking the PSSA, that's a federal mandate that we take the PSSA. They gave us the waiver the first year of COVID, but not this year. but they did give us an option of being flexible. We could have took it in the spring or over the summer, but also lastly, it has to be done within the first, or actually by the end of September. So we decided based on our current context that we will take that PSSA this fall when we return. Now, when it comes to progress monitoring, I'm going to bring on Dr. Dwyer to talk a little bit about that, specific to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So when we look at students and we look at the information that we have for students, prior to last year, we didn't have a nationally normed assessment, so we had to rely on the PSSA information to identify whether or not or where students were performing. At the beginning of last year, we brought in the NWA MAP test, which provides an individual student measure for where a student is. So we should be able to look at the outcomes for students and see if there was learning loss from last year to this year. In order to really do that, we would have needed to have the assessment the year prior to that to see what the normal learning loss would be before a pandemic. And since it wasn't in place, what we'll be able to do is compare it to national norms and national changes and what the expected performance for students were across the nation as compared to where we are as we're going into this next year. So once we collect the NWA information at the beginning of the 21-22 school year, we'll be able to make a statement about what our performance and what possible performance losses were for the individual students.
Is the NWEA, is that also how you measure proficiency?
So proficiency is specifically tied to the state assessment because the state assessment's built around a criterion for each grade level. So proficiency is measuring how a school is, the PSSA is measuring how a school is doing in relation to all of the students in the school and how they're performing in relation to the proficiency as defined by the state in the PSSA. So the NWA provides information to the teachers on where a student is in relation to the standards that are state aligned, or the state standards that are aligned to or that are measured by the PSSA. So it does give us both a national norm and a projection for where a student may perform on the PSSA based on their performance on the test. It also gives us a metric for when the student takes a test, where they're performing. And because it's a linked test, which our PSSAs aren't, we can look at what the change is from the first test to the next test to see if there is actually any change. One of the difficulties with PSSA is it gives us information about where the student is performing in the grade level that they were when they took the test, and it doesn't necessarily identify all of the information that would be beneficial to a teacher for what do they need to do with the student in the current year, because we don't get the state test results until towards the summer. So they really can't do much with the state assessments for how the student's doing in the grade level that the state assessment is evaluating. But remember, the PSSA is the Pennsylvania School Assessment Program. So it was built to measure assessment. It was built to provide an accountability metric for schools and not necessarily for students. So that test gives us a picture of where we were performing. And what we've tried to do is make sure that we have an assessment that teachers can use to both look at projections for where they may perform and provide live information that they can make a decision about a student right now. And now that we've got an assessment that's linked across time, we can also look at what the performance of the student is and how that's changed without a really complicated statistical model, which is actually what PLOS does. So I tend to be very verbose. So did I answer your question?
That's okay, you did. Can parents also have access to the NWEA? I know my wife, we actually asked for ours because we wanted to see where our children were so that we could identify areas that we may need to work with them over the summer going into next year, but we haven't been able to gain access to it.
So the NWA is the assessment for your child. that is a parent's right to see what the results of their students' educational activities are. So absolutely yes. One of the things that we're working on is making sure that the reports for NWA are being uploaded into the home access center so that you can log on and actually see their results and see the family report. But there is a report that both describes it and is available. And as a parent, you have every right to ask for the information about where your child is performing on an assessment or in a class.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we'll go back. We've asked, we just haven't gotten it yet. The part of the reason why I'm asking this is, at least in my mind, as a parent, right? As a parent who both me and my wife were home all year in the house, so we were able to force our children to be online, ensuring that they were actually doing their work. I know there was still a certain level of learning loss that occurred over the last year. And given that we know, according to the statistics, that many of our children, especially Black and brown children, were already behind the grade level where they were supposed to be, add another level a year of pandemic learning on top of that, they're even further behind. And so my question, and you mentioned Saturday school, which I think could probably be a great idea, was, is there any consideration, because this makes sense in my mind, but I'm not the educator, which is why I'm asking, is there any conversation at the board level or at the administration level to begin looking at more of a year-round model for teaching our children as a way to begin trying to get them back up to where they are? And again, I know there are many models out there, but in my mind, it's year-round, but maybe you have all of December off, and maybe all of August off, something along those lines. But and then children also aren't experiencing that summer learning loss that occurs, which I know the summer program is working to address. But I'm just considering, is there any conversation along those lines?
Again, everything's up in the air right now. We definitely have those conversations, look at the research when it comes to the effectiveness of year-round school. But one thing I want to put in the space around year-round schools is that the children, regardless of how you space it out, currently right now, they still will attend 180 days, right? So I think we're trying to not look at 180 days, but the thought around, sometimes I think people think when it comes to year-round school is that your child is going to get more days in school. And so that still will be 180 days, however you space it out, right?
Why is it only 180? Are we restricted to being able to?
That's by PA code, if I'm not mistaken.
Really? Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, so that's why we have, so Better Served, whatever their 180 days is, still have summer programming that children can come to, which goes beyond 180 days, if that makes sense.
It does. And,
okay.
Last summer, 2 summers ago at this point, I did have my children in the summer program, so I understand it. I didn't realize that we were restricted to 180 days by state law. Oh, okay, I'll look into that. You mentioned the buses.
So just to clarify, this is Ronald Jones, Chief Financial Officer. In terms of the requirement, that's the requirement that serves the minimum. So we are required to provide a minimum of 180 days of compulsory education. So I just wanted to state that by minimum, we're required to provide 180 days. So we can't provide less than that unless we have exceptions from the state. So it's just to ensure that that's the base number of days that also translates to a certain number of instructional hours and minutes.
Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Joseph. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I guess my position would be, and I don't know what the exact number is, so I'm just throwing this out there, that our kids need the minimum of 180, but given where they are, they probably need closer to 300 days of instruction. Is sort of my thinking. But I also, in terms of when you say collaboration, because I did have a conversation with my principal about this, and sort of what she had mentioned at the time was, if you were to go down that road, then you would need greater levels of collaboration between the city and the schools. Many of our schools don't have air conditioning. So once in the summertime, would there be access to the rec centers? Could there be access to city pools? Things of that nature, especially to really deal with the summertime. And so towards that end, if this is a willing conversation, then I would certainly be willing to begin looking at all of what you've already suggested, but ways in which we could, as a city, as the entire ecosystem, as you mentioned it in your beginning remarks, really begin working to ensuring that we could indeed provide the level of instruction and additional levels of support that is necessary. You mentioned in your collaboration slide our rec centers. Is there a way for the city to understand or have the curriculum that's being taught in school so that when our children come home or maybe go to our rec centers, we could then, or many of our children who go to, like my children go to after school programs in the churches, right?
Mhm.
Is there a way to then take that standard curriculum and have city workers, our rec centers, our church after school programs also enhancing that exact same curriculum?
Yeah, yeah. I would say yes, that's a great idea. And in some form or fashion, we do that with some of our out of school time partners. But it would be good if that's the actually consistent across all of our out of school time partners that we work with, even in the churches, wherever they may be. If you're working and supporting our children, we can certainly provide you the curriculum. So there's a level of consistency of what we're teaching in during the day, and also how you're supporting and bolstering those working with those students in the evening and out of school time programs.
I would like to add, when I was a teacher at Miller School, our after-school program was with 2 other organizations, and that was one of the things that we did. We made sure that students, when they had homework or whatever we were doing, that there was some communication with them. It's intensive, it's labor intensive, but it can work, but you have to be able to be willing to do that. So, the people on the other end have to be willing to want to follow through on the information that we provide.
Thank you. You mentioned a shortage of bus drivers, and I know there's a shortage across the board. My fear is if we have this shortage of bus drivers in a month and a half, essentially, and many children then will not end up getting to school, right? Because as you mentioned, many of our children are coming from communities of poverty. Reverend Burgess mentioned that many our children have mothers and fathers who are the essential workers and who aren't going to be able to take time off to drive their children to school. And many of those children, I'm fearful, are just not going to go. Is there a strategy, or how can we as a city assist in either recruiting bus drivers, training bus drivers, or working to solve for that problem? Because I'm very fearful that if we do not have the level of drivers and buses necessary, many of our children will not be showing back up.
I would say we can certainly have that conversation, but we'd be better served if our interim chief operations officer, Mr. Mike McNamara, and also our director of transportation, I know they're doing exhaustive work and finding ways and coming up with different ideas to support the transportation companies with actually getting bus drivers. So they've done some work. So I think we better serve if we have another conversation and have them involved in that conversation. That way you have that fresh, specific information and initiatives that they're working on to support getting bus drivers to our bus counts. And just at a high level, I know we're talking about raising the rates for some of our transportation providers, things of that nature. So it's an incentive for people to actually come back to work. And right now, just where we are, ultimately, you have some people that say, I can make more money sitting at home on unemployment than I can driving a bus. And so those are some of the things we deal with. But still, how can we provide a level of support to these transportation companies to make sure it's inviting and enticing for individuals to come back to work or people to come on as new bus drivers as well? So we can certainly have that conversation.
Okay, I look forward to it.
I would like to add too that ABC Transit had a large recruitment effort on the north side over by the stadium, by the football stadium, Heinz Field. And they had an activity to bring a lot of people out. And my understanding is they only received between 12 or 15 applications for people who were interested in driving the bus.
Yeah, that's accurate. I think a total of like 300 or so people came out, but only 17 actually put in an application.
Okay, thank you. Sylvia, I also had a conversation with DeWitt about it, given the training program that he runs. So he may be worthwhile being a part of that conversation as well.
Sure.
There was something else I specifically wanted to ask, but I can't remember. Oh, well, so one, so you are aware, we had the same conversation with the charter schools yesterday, or many of the charter schools. And part of what we talked about was if there are some charter schools who are doing certain things better than others, if there are some charter schools who have said, well, we found a way to better educate our children, is there a table whereby we can bring, I mean, charter schools are still public schools, but we can bring PPS and the heads of our charter schools together to look at what is best practices, what's working great in Dilworth, and how could that be better implemented in Urban Academy? What's working great at City High, and how could that be better implemented at Westinghouse? Is there a table, or can we form a table where we can bring together all of our experts in the education field to talk about best practices and especially closing the gap between our Black and brown and white children?
Sure, there's certainly a space that we can sit at the table and collaborate, because ultimately, the children of Pittsburgh are all our children. And so in some form or fashion, those kids go from charter school back to Pittsburgh public schools and vice versa on a regular basis. And so, you know, it would be in our best interest, to your point, to share best practices. So there's a level of consistency of what we're trying to, the instructional design we're trying to deliver to our children in our classroom. So that's certainly a space as well.
Okay, I'll yield the floor for now, Reverend.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to our president and then to Erica. Our president, Teresa Kell-Smith, is with us, and so I'll go to President Smith.
Thank you, Reverend, and thank you, Dr. Hamlet and Director Wilson for joining us with your team. Well, I've been watching most of these, and yesterday there was a, as they mentioned, a post agenda with the charter schools, and I thought that it was interesting to hear some of their conversations, but I do want to point out that there is a forum already that we could have everyone at the table, and it was the Education Committee, which we never seated anyone. Once we made it a committee, it was no one was ever seated. The council can still use that, but it does have room for charter schools and private schools at the table, so that we're addressing this as our children of Pittsburgh, not just our children who attend public schools, but our children of Pittsburgh. So I'm willing to work on that if that's something that the members would like to do. But in the after school programs, I do know that Steve McIsaac with I think it's it used to be Wireless Neighborhoods, now I think it's the Education Learning Alliance. They do enhance what's going on in schools, but through their after school programs, they do have the work that they collaborate with Pittsburgh Public Schools. So there are those programs that are already occurring and have been occurring for decades. But I think for me, I'd like to see more collaboration with the athletic associations and groups that already are working with kids, because I think we did that over here as a pilot program over in Elliott years ago when I ran the Parent Educational Resource Center for Pittsburgh Public Schools in the West. Our Elliott Athletic Association had a computer, and before kids could hit the field, they had to make sure that the coaches worked with the district to make sure their homework was done, to see if they needed any help. And they worked a little bit with the parents and the kids. But I feel like I just want to say, I hope that in all these plans, there's a real plan to include parents, because we can keep, I say this all the time, kids all day long. At some point, they return home to a lot of dysfunction in many cases, not all, but some cases. And so if we keep kids all year round, if we keep kids all day long, they still at some point have to go home, or some of them, a lot of times kids don't go home. I mean, we have kids that sleep in parks and walk the streets and get into trouble or are hurt or harmed in some way, which just adds to their problems. So I hope that we do something to include parents, and that, to me, that is giving a lot of the resources to help parents do the things they need to do to be successful. Dr. Hamlet, years ago, we used to have as I mentioned, the Parent Educational Resource Centers. And I talked to the mayor's office about opening some resource centers. And I know that they're working on some separately with Reverend and AHN and others. But I want to know what the Pittsburgh Public Schools plans on doing to provide resources to parents and guardians, because a lot of times there's second time around grandparents, raising their children, their grandchildren. So and they know things have changed tremendously since we were young. So I want to know what resources we're providing now, and if there's any discussion on that, and that level.
So one of the things I want to put in this space right now, because I know our time is limited. Oftentimes, and I've been doing this for a long time, especially in engagement and collaboration and conversation with groups, et cetera. I want to say, can we think about not the issues, because I think we know what the issues are, but what are the solutions that we can put into this space? And I know Erica was going to answer that question. I just want to put that thought in this space. So Erica, thank you for letting me chime in for your commentary.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamlet. Erica Jones, Chief of Staff. I would first of all, I love what you said in regards to like this idea of like, if we all ran the issues, we would all have a long list. And then like the hard part is, what do we do for implementation? And President Kel Smith, I love, people do go back to the glory days, and I'm going to call them glory days, when we had, those parent resource centers. We had these, you were one of them, the staff who was dedicated to maybe a certain region for parents. And so what we do right now is, not necessarily that, which, people might have said that could have been a best practice. And maybe with the ESSER funds, and as we continue to talk with our parents and with others along this engagement, we'll see what comes up and how we might be able to enhance our parent engagement strategies. We do have an individual at every single school called a FACE coordinator, a family and community engagement coordinator. It's not to the level, the full-time work that you did, but we do try to identify someone who's responsible of working with the principal, because ultimately it's the principal's job, but working with the principal to connect with parents. We do have, our parent advisory council. We do have community schools as the ultimate, where we do have full-time staff that is focused just on how we leverage resources for our schools. We have 9 of those in 8 buildings, but you are correct that parents are a big part of the solution, and we do have to be more creative in regards to how we bring them in. And on tomorrow, we actually have an ESSER engagement session with just parent leaders, and parent leaders got a chance to invite other parents to the table. And we're just going to focus just on parents, because sometimes we do know the issue, we have some ideas around solution, and we just want to, before we implement, to just double check with actual parents to make sure is what we're thinking the right thing, and then what ideas do we have that we just didn't think of. So thank you for that comment. That was excellent. Parents are a big key to this.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I just want to add to the space as well, piggybacking on Director Kel Smith's commentary. We have a robust relationship and partnership with Neighborhood Learning Alliance. I'm glad you brought them up, but also just so the group knows that we have over 200 community partnerships with organizations and universities across the city. So we're highly collaborative. We want partners. We need partners to work with us to support our children. So I just want to add that in the space.
Thank you. I just want to say, I do know that the Pittsburgh Public Schools works tremendously with the community and works with a lot of partners. Sometimes people that don't deliver what they say they're going to deliver, and some people, I wonder why we're working with them. But honestly, I think if everybody just focuses on whatever we do moves that achievement gap, I think that should be just the real focus, and just student achievement and safety as well. I think that safety is something we sometimes overlook. But I hear what you're saying about the Erica, about the people that are working within the schools, but also the site-based budgeting. I'm wondering if there's any. First, let me just say I did that work, and I know that there's a direct correlation between student success, achievement, and a lower rate of disciplinary actions for students who have parents involved in the school district. There's no doubt, but all the data proves, points to it, the success and how important it is. So whatever we have to do that, I would like for us to work together, whether it's, opening these centers together, making sure there's space in there for Pittsburgh Public Schools, or group violence intervention, or whatever it is. I think people get so tired. There's so much information. There is so much help, but nobody knows where to go. And it's overload sometimes. And 211 is great, but even sometimes when they call 211, they call us because they couldn't get the resources that they need, that I know they have, or they were not eligible. And so it's taking that time and getting to work with parents and finding out what their needs are. So I just want to say, I think if we can collaborate somewhere in that area, I would love to see us do that, because I think it's definitely needed. But site-based budgeting in the schools, and tell me how that helps with making sure that there's an equal distribution, other than, or to make sure things are equitable across the system, because every principal might have a different priority. And so if they don't think that it's valuable having parent time or something, they may not utilize that money in that way, or keep the person that long, or if they don't, or spend money on parent engagement in some way. Are there some criteria set that you have to make sure that at least some of the budget has to go towards whatever it is that makes the schools more equitable?
I'm gonna have Mr. Joseph answer that question for you. Mr. Joseph.
Sure. So our site-based budget, and this talk speaks to some work that we're doing with our administration and principals to try to figure out how do we push more factors that target equity and individual school needs in our site-based budget. So our site-based budgets are driven by the enrollment in the school, and then that's also compared to what our service delivery model or standards for how you staff a school, the resources that should be in a school. We do, in our schools Title I budgets, we do require that schools have a portion that's dedicated to parent involvement, plus we also do have central allocations for parent involvement. Schools use those Title I funds and other funds that they may get based on state designation or need from different funding sources to align to those school priorities. So for Title I funds, for CSI funds, which are comprehensive support improvement funds, or other funds that schools may get, there's a school improvement plan that needs to drive that. And that's something that augments that funding, but we also want to look at the funding that we give as a district, which is our site-based budgeting. How can we work with our principals to ensure that we can come up with a system that we can try to push more funds there in an equitable manner. So right now, the work has been shoring up the base, making sure that we have an equal distribution based on all factors, that all schools have the same standard and level standard of the supports that they're in schools. And then we need to then work with our principals to figure out what factors that we can target with our equity-based funding, because we don't just want to pick an arbitrary factor and push more resources to schools. We want to make sure that based on the student population, that those resources that we push are going to be targeted to a specific evidence-based practice that we know will lead to improvement in that school based on the factor that you're trying to improve. So we're working on that process right now. Right now, we're trying to shore up the site-based budget allocation to make sure that we take feedback from our principals to hear about some of the pain points that they've had, try to address those pain points. But as you know, with any resource allocation model, you're bound by the resource that you have available. So in order to push more resources in, we need to figure out places within our existing budget where we can reallocate those resources from.
And then the other thing I just want, there's just a few other points I want to make, and then I'll turn it over to other members. I can go on all day talking about Pittsburgh Public Schools and our work within the city together. For the going year round, and we talk about attracting more of a diverse group of teachers and staff. Going year round, do you think that helps attract more of a diverse group, or do you think that has any effect on if you're going longer days? To me, the attraction of being a teacher in Pittsburgh Public Schools is you get summer off and you get to stay home with your kids, or you get to do what you want in the summer. I wonder how that affects who you attract. Do you attract a pool of talented teachers and staff if you don't have that incentive as you're having the summers off or shorter hours that you can work around your children? Because I know a lot of people don't apply now for our crossing guards because they want to be closer to home. So and they want to know where they're going to be sent. So we're having an issue with that. So I'm curious how you think that would affect your attracting more of a diverse pool of applicants, if at all.
Are you referring to the applicants to the teaching positions and the
positions or anyone who would work now that would be off in the summer?
Yeah, I think ultimately, that question, I would bring it back to, is year-round schooling beneficial to children, and begin with that. I think, if either you have a traditional or either you have the year-round, you would still have people that would like either one. And so I think you would get applicants, people like that flexibility, but ultimately, is year-round school good for children? That should lead the conversation in some form or fashion, I think, and just putting that in space.
Well, I agree with that, but I agree that answering the question whether or not you'd have an attractive pool of candidates if you didn't have that incentive of being
Yeah.
off. Also, maybe you wouldn't. Maybe so. Then maybe it wouldn't be good for students because you're not attracting the best and the brightest.
Yeah, no, I would say it's 50-50. Right now, there's no definitive answer.
I would like to see some kind of pool
Yeah.
or something, student teachers, across the city or
Yeah,
the region. I'd like to see something because I'm curious about how that would attract people.
I kind of think that if the school district were on a different schedule, you would just have people who want to work no matter what the schedule is. So I don't know that there would be an incentive. But actually, while I was sitting here listening to you, I was remembering, summer's off. Well, I didn't work in the summer for a long time, but I was 100% of the time on the baseball field. And I wonder how much that would impact other activities that are in the summer. You're talking about changing because, we have coaches that work with the kids in practice during the day, their games were in the evening, but that would impact a lot of things. It wouldn't be just worrying about school. I don't think that's an issue about teachers, because if you have time off during the rest of the year, if you had a month off in December, for instance, or if you were off every 2 weeks, or you had different breaks of 2 weeks here or 3-week breaks throughout the year, you just get used to it. That would just be something. So it's not a matter of what the teachers would want or recruitment. It is like Dr. Hamlet said, what would be best for kids? If it would be great to have a month off in mid-year or have school year round with 3-week breaks in between, that would be a totally different thing, because that would just be what your work year would be.
Yeah, I agree. And well, a lot of our teachers do volunteer in the communities with the kids all summer long. So I don't know what we do without some of our public employees because they do so much in the community. With that said, the last thing I want to ask is, do we have any status on the teacher's contract for the union?
I can say, of course, we can't talk about negotiations, but we are in ongoing conversations and it's going in a great direction. I can say that.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. And I just want to thank you all for all your work that you do with the kids. And I do appreciate it. But I'm just going to end with the last thing I want to say is I heard a lot from the charter schools yesterday. And I think it would be great to have a conversation with you and the charter schools, because there was a lot of things said yesterday that I had a lot of questions for, but I had a meeting at 1:30, so I had, or 2:30, so I had to log off. But I would like to have that conversation. So maybe Reverend Burgess and Councilwoman Val and I can schedule something where we can all sit down together. Thank
Sure.
you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for everything you do. Be safe. Thank you, Reverend and Daniel, for hosting this.
Thank you. Erica Strasburger, Councilwoman Erica Strasburger. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to you quick enough yesterday.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. However, I believe there are council members who arrived here before me, if you wanted to.
Well, you were here yesterday. I couldn't get to you. That's why I came to you now. I know you have a very young one at home, and I couldn't get you fast enough yesterday. I think Bobby I think he'll be okay with you going next.
He's giving me the thumbs up. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, well, I'll in that spirit, I'll keep it quick and just ask one question. Thank you, Dr. Hamlet and your team for being here, and for School Board President Wilson. My main question is about collaboration. And in my mind, as we've talked about again and again, it serves no one. It does not serve the city. It does not serve our children if we are operating in silos. We've tried various strategies in the past. We tried education, task force or committee that would come together. But I'd like to ask you, in your mind, what is the best way for all of us, city council, school board, mayor's office, administration, representatives from charter schools? What is the best way for us all to work together? What is the vehicle to ensure ongoing engagement and communication back and forth as a two-way street, not one entity seeming to step on others' toes, but actually in partnership, working toward a true partnership and facilitating trust? Is it council, initiating an education committee? And I see that school board has a government relations committee, adding to that, communications with city council. Is it something besides just your standard task force where some, internal entity brings everyone together? What is the best way in your mind? And I'm opening it up to really anyone who'd like to answer that question, because I truly want to see that happen. I'm not an expert at what we've tried in the past because I'm fairly new on council and I was not part of that in the past, but I'm open to any ideas that people might have, and I'd like to try to help to make that happen.
Yeah, I'll just start, and I'll put this in the space as well. One of the things, again, and being in education for almost 30 years now and working with working groups and task force and groups as well, one of the things that we need to do once we begin to collaborate is we need to level set on what and define collaboration. Because ultimately, we begin in those spaces and, one party thinks collaboration is this, another party thinks collaboration is that. So whatever we do, and I think all the ideas that you brought forth, and even more, some of the things that are great that we can do. Again, not work in silos, but be more inclusive of each other, especially to one of your points about government legislation. Also, how can you support us in Harrisburg and vice versa as well? But also, we put out doing all in. We had a great inclusive participation, but also with Imagine, there are opportunities for you to join design teams based on your own interest. And so there are avenues and ways. And one thing we can do is kind of draw up more specific ways or ideas from us and provide it to the council. So you're going to use and vice versa as well, and really begin to expand and explore based on that initial information that we provide to each other around collaborative opportunities. So I know Erica was going to say something as well. Erica,
Yes.
Kirby Jones, sorry.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna echo what you said, and definitely, people will say, let's have you guys can come up with any type of task force or committee or commission that you want to do. Those are fine to create new tables. One of the things that we just found with Imagine, and we use these, Imagine, but the new work that we're doing is that we were actually able to tap into people's, passion, right? Passion, expertise. And so, for us, it's really understanding where do you want to push in, because sometimes going to a task force meeting, while it could be great, and I'm not taking away from task force meeting, people love those committees, but also there's something about like, I show up more if it's actually attached to my passion and my expertise. So, people who love early childhood, they tapped into this idea of us designing a birth to a grade 2 school. Imagine a school district actually working on a birth to grade 2 school, a birth to grade school, so that kids are ready to read on grade level. And that's nowhere in the country. So people are joining there. People who underneath underperforming schools, which I don't want to use that title. That's not like sexy or anything that's nice, but it's a reality for those schools who are sort of us trying to figure out that they're the first ones that we're going to try to break that cycle. Somebody might want to join the design team at Malliance and say, Malliance, I'm looking at Lavelle. Malliance is something that we've been trying to do. I'm going to join that design team. And the same thing for Westinghouse. Reverend Burst may say, I'm going to. So this idea, we actually tried to have these areas that we are concerned about. We know that others are concerned about, and we are trying to attach to people's passion and their interest, because maybe a task force might be great. And again, I'm going to say I'm not against that for those who love that. But if it's something that is my passion and something that I'm concerned about and I actually can have action to, that is how we try to structure this next set of our strategic plan and trying to tackle these real life issues. Thank you so much.
I was going to say that's great what both Dr. Hamlet and Erica has just relayed about the bigger, larger picture and ways to collaborate. But I don't think that I'm wrong on this. Every school is supposed to have a parent school community council. I have worked at 2 schools where we had great collaboration with community and parents along with the school. And where we had a very good school community council, we actually saw a lot of growth in our students and what we offered our kids, the opportunities that we provided, and some programs that were created by that. So every school has the opportunity to do that. I think that the leadership in the school kind of creates the atmosphere or the environment to have very good rapport with their community. And that's something that's available right now. It hasn't changed. The only change is that sometimes we have new administrators who aren't aware of the potential that the parent school community council can actually have.
Thank you. You're all speaking my language. I mean, that all that makes sense to me, and in terms of having both you know, I think that it reminds me of the really successful boards that I've sat on, where you are part of the board, you show up once a month for the board meetings, but then you're all on committees that speak to you. You dig into the committees that you're most interested in, that aligns with your interests. That's a way to both get to know and build trust with the people that you're serving with, and to feel like you're really a part of the board rather than just showing up and casting votes once a month. So I really like that sort of dig into the interest, you know, that speaks to you model, and the more dispersed model. But if we could also figure out, I think, some sort of formalized way to, you know, and as Dr. Hamlet said, to figure out ahead of time what collaboration looks like, to have multiple pathways toward that, so that if, you know, the school community council drops off in one area, there's still this other thing to be able to maintain those relationships, or that, you know, the relationship, even when people in those positions leave, the structure is still there. I think that could be something, if we could, I mean, if that's something that we can figure out together here, not today, obviously, but if we all can figure that out and leave that as a legacy, that would be pretty powerful and amazing. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, my only other thought on this, in this line of thinking, is it can't be just one person from each entity knowing one another. I don't think that's enough to build those bridges. It has to be wide bridges. It has to be multiple people from multiple sort of entities knowing what the other entities are doing, and communicating, collaborating in some way. So those are my only thoughts there. That's the only question I have. So if there are any other comments on that line of thinking, that's great. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Erica. I want to turn now to Bobby Wilson, followed by Anthony Colico. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Councilman, and thank you everyone for coming to the table today, and especially Councilman Lavelle and Burgess to introduce this legislation and the productive conversations that we've been having. You know, I hear a lot about collaboration, and you know, I think council, we have to applaud council, because recently, you know, we extended the COVID sick pay leave for workers, and going into this next school year, you know, especially with children under the age of 12 that aren't vaccinated yet, we still have yet to see that plan of how that will be rolled out once it's approved. But I believe we did this in a large part to provide an opportunity to support families so that they can support their children if there is, you know, some sort of COVID outbreak, or if they're just even one child test positive, or is, you know, has to quarantine. And so that would be under the guidelines of, you know, Allegheny Health Department, but also the Pittsburgh Public Schools, and how you're going to handle that moving forward. And, you know, really want to just make sure that we don't lose sight of, you know, that we're still not out of this pandemic, especially with everyone going back to school in person. And I just want to hear a little bit more about, you know, that plan in terms of how children may have to, you know, take off school or be at home. If someone could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
I know we have our Chief Academic Officer, Ms. Jenkins, here on the line as well, but I'll chime in. That's something that we know that's an issue, and we don't have a full answer for you yet, but we are working on that. That's one of our priorities. We know this is going to happen, especially with this Delta variant, the uptick in the Delta variant and its spread as well, but also the uptick in COVID infections as well. And so we know that's on the uptick. We want to try to make sure we're as safe as possible in bringing our students back. And so it just coincides that the CDC just came out yesterday and said they recommend all K-12 schools wear masks. We had already made that decision because we know, based on experience, that this is going to happen. And ultimately, our goal is to make sure that we create the most safe environments for our children, our faculty and staff to come back into. Ms. Jenkins, are you there? He's coming up. Yeah. I don't know if you heard the question was around what are we doing, and correct if I'm wrong, Councilman Wilson, around what are we doing with children who may be exposed to COVID, who have to be home, how they're going to be educated, et cetera. I think that was the essence of the question, right?
Yeah, I was starting off by saying, I believe, council is trying to support families in a way so that they don't have to choose between their paycheck or taking care of their child. If they have to stay at home because of a positive test or some sort of quarantine situation.
Thank you so much for that question. So we are going to continue to use our learning management system, which is Schoology, to provide online learning opportunities for students. But for students who are in the school that happen to get COVID, it depends on how many days they're going to be out. We are exploring options. So it could potentially be homebound, or they might be shifted to maybe a virtual teacher. It just depends on how long that individual will be out. As of right now, all students that are opting to stay remote would have to go through Pittsburgh Online Academy, which is for grades 4 through 12. We have had families that have asked to and get grades K-3 that want an online option. So we're still exploring that as a possibility. But for right now, we would still utilize our learning management system to work with students virtually. There is options that we might be able to still allow those students to remote in. The difference is the teacher in the environment not having to do hybrid. So it all depends on the number of students at that particular time.
Okay, well, thanks for that update. I know it's an evolving situation, so I just wanted to talk about it.
I think we also will be continuing to encourage as many families and children that are eligible to be vaccinated.
Definitely. And yes, also the COVID sick pay does allow for workers to take off to get their child vaccinated or for themselves to be vaccinated as well without losing pay. So we're trying to help in that way as well for families. So I just want to go back a second and just talk about the basic reason why. In large part why we're here about, I hear, a lot of talk at the council, or, it's been discussed about the achievement gap. And we discussed it here. You presented some of this in your presentation. And I was just curious on, it's not like someone has the secret that they're not giving us for, why there maybe is, why there is this achievement gap and the reasons for it. I just wanted to hear, and I know you covered it in your presentation, but I just want to understand, really the racial disparity in this achievement gap and what you're doing to solve that issue.
So thank you for the question. I'll begin, and one of the things I've been talking about since my arrival and even before in my previous life in Palm Beach County Public Schools is that the achievement gap begins at birth. So we don't work collaboratively to find solutions to support those children and families that we know need that additional support in these communities that we know, or areas that we know these students aren't getting the intellectual stimulation they need to be able to come to kindergarten or preschool on grade level. That happens at birth. It begins at birth. And so once they get to us in kindergarten, we're playing catch up. It's difficult and tough to play catch up. The most developmental time for children to learn that language is from birth through age 3 and 4 and beyond. And so how can we think about, this city has tons of billions of dollars. How can we work together, this city, right? The private companies, the nonprofit companies, the city legislators, the Pittsburgh Public Schools, how can we create a different design that's going to really support and eradicate this achievement gap? And I truly believe if we come up with some ways and options to support those children from birth to kindergarten or birth to pre-K, we begin to see a difference in that achievement gap. That's just my comment.
And so that would be just more early education, more focus on early education. If you're talking about from birth, is that?
Yes, yeah. That's a different concept. And interestingly enough, we have others on board working with us on a potential school reopening of Northview, but that's going to be very unique. So we believe in this. We're working with the Children's Museum and also various foundations around this idea of creating a birth to age 2 school over on the north side. Erica, you want to elaborate on that more? I know that's one of your projects as well.
I wanted to elaborate on that. I also wanted to go back a little bit. And so but let me go at it the way you just said. So we know that, so we have, so that's the idea of inequities is maybe what we were starting to talk about. So we have kids who go to Harvard, right, graduate Harvard, and then we got, schools where people are trying to, get into, and if they don't get into that school, they want to go somewhere else. So we have these schools that are excellent and schools that are struggling, and they have the potential to be excellent. Let me just say it that way. And I think that you would also say, Councilman Wilson, that in neighborhoods, right, the neighborhoods in which we have and that you guys serve, maybe there's a difference as well. And so what we're trying to say is, how do we work together so that the strategies that you're trying to put into neighborhoods to limit the maybe somebody may call it a gap. I don't know, maybe somebody calls it something else, but we know in the city of Pittsburgh that there are issues in regards to the neighborhood infrastructures, and sometimes they map directly on to the schools in which they exist. And so I'm not trying to say that that's exactly a 1-for-1 for the achievement gap. I'm not trying to do that at all, but I think I was just trying to echo a little bit what Dr. Ham was saying is, that might be a strategy, for us where we also can really get, because eliminating the achievement gap is a school-based piece, but it also is, supporting parents with the wages that they might need. It might be housing in which they might need. It might be some other things that might contribute to the achievement gap other than just the schools in which they attend. And then now that is like if there was a, Erica, my, great minds think alike, but if there was really a collaboration to really look at, that's some of the very hard, intense work that when you talk about a system, an ecosystem, that is really intense work. But definitely, as Dr. Hamlet would say, that we're not shirking from our responsibility at all, and not what we need to do in order to improve our schools. We do have some plans, and not just plans for paper around that, but I just would also just offer that piece, just sort of echoing and sort of going one layer deeper than what Dr. Hamlet said.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because if you're talking about the inequities across the city of Pittsburgh in terms of neighborhoods, and if I hear you correctly, you're saying that there would be an association with, or a correlation with neighborhoods that have, let's just pick one factor, which would be vacant abandoned housing, in that neighborhood, but that would somehow be related to or in association with children who are achieving lower than others.
Yeah, and I would put the land bank in there, but I think what happens is that we have like just this silo effects or silo focuses, like let's just only focus on the school district, and then let's only focus on land banks. It's really like, how do you actually sort of get, the collective impact to get all those arrows of what we're all trying to do to combat this problem? How do we get the arrows all to go into the right space so that we actually can have leverage to really have change? And so focusing on the schools is huge. That's a huge bucket. So we're not shirking away from that. That is a huge lever. It's a big weight. And also when we take that responsibility, and also what we're just saying is how do we also align some of these other things like a land bank, like something else, how do we all get it all aligned so that we really can pull that lever and really make it go further, faster?
Well, you're really finishing my thought, because I wanted to bring up the land bank and talk about just how, with the city of Pittsburgh, the county, and also the school district, we're the three taxing bodies that, hopefully we can get as much collaboration on solving the vacant abandoned property issue, and how much you all will be involved, the school district will be involved with what the land bank will be trying to achieve here. Is there any comment on your thoughts on the land bank and how you can be involved with as one of the taxing bodies, how we can work together to solve some of these barriers to moving these properties forward?
Is that a Mr. Joseph question? Bring it on. Okay.
So we've had a meeting with the URA and the individuals in charge of the land bank, and we've met and we've given them our feedback, some feedback on the legislation that's being proposed. So The conversations are ongoing. We do see it as that it's a place where, when used correctly, it can affect great change for the community in terms of blighted and underutilized properties. So it's an ongoing discussion. We do see value in the land bank. We just want to make sure that our concerns that we have with regard to the composition and some of the powers that may be extended to the land bank are met.
Okay. Okay. Well, would you be Mr. Joseph, would you be the individual to have further conversation about this from?
I believe the person who's charging is of the land bank, and I believe his name escapes me right now. He did reach out to our business and finance committee chairs, and I believe they're scheduled to have a meeting. But myself and our solicitor, we've been involved in some of the discussions about the land bank, and I know dating back to multiple years ago, being in this role and being in privy to some of the discussions of the land bank as it was proposed at that point in time.
Okay. Thank you. And yeah, if there is any more information on Northview, that'd be great. I mean, that was the elementary school that I went to, and it'd be great to see that come back in some way, so anyway, looking forward to any sort of, I'm happy to be involved with it's in my district, obviously, so happy to be involved with any sort of opportunities there to help.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Conkill.
Yes, thank you, Anthony, Sylvia. It's good to see you both again. Thank you for being here, and our other guests as well. I just first want to say I'm a proud product of the Pittsburgh Public Schools. My only education, 1 through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, was Beechwood School and Brashear High School. So, I could be used as a good product or a bad one. I qualify for both areas, I think. So I did want to remark, I guess, as to what Councilwoman Strasburger said, how would we work together? I do speak to one of my school board representatives, Billy Gallagher, who was, a high school football coach at Perry for many years, and I think has more city titles than any other coach that we've ever had. So we kind of think alike. We're both kind of coach and sports oriented. And we talk about having a job program or job fair, if you will, somewhere in Brookline along the lines. And I'll admit, I don't get mixed up in how I feel, you should conduct your curriculum. I'm probably not the best example to dictate that by any means or give you suggestions. But I do feel there's many other ways we could work together, and that's just one of many ways I hope to be working with Billy. But Mr. Chair, if you'll allow me, to go, well, it's not really off subject because it's all about working together. But I have to bring up the Bon Air school situation with you all, okay? And Mr. Hamlet, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's really, it could be viewed as a misunderstanding. We could call it many things, but I just want you both to know, I'm not a parliamentarian, but this community adamantly opposes development there. And, it was a situation where I had met with Pat Mercetti and some others originally. And from that, when I originally found out there was a sale, you found a buyer, a responsible buyer, which I view him, Gregory Development, as a responsible buyer. I'd like to work with him on other projects through my district, but this one in particular is just going to be a hard time it's going to be a PR nightmare for all of us and for him as well. So I'm trying to, I had spoken to Ira Weiss and talked about, how we can, if it's possible, to reverse your decision. If you can put it back on the table. I still haven't gotten any sure answers on that as of yet. But, again, originally we thought, hey, it's a good thing you have a buyer. The building's been sitting there for 14 years. The problem what came in where the school board voted on it before we had a big community meeting. Now, you voted 9-0 to pass it under the assumption that it would, was supported, I guess, by community members, I guess is the way it was put. But if it was just going by on the 3 or 4 of us that were there at the original meeting, we probably should have waited till after the larger meeting. just to get the real scope of what the neighborhood felt. It's obvious to me, my colleagues will tell you, they call in city council every day. I'm sure they have statements read at your board's meetings as well. So I'm looking for some help on this, in one way or the other. I'm not sure, again, I'm not a parliamentarian, if we can put this back on the table or not, but I will tell you, it's 100% support. They decided they would love a green space, and I support that. I support the people there. So is there any insight you can give me on this at all?
I think this conversation will be best served offline, but I don't know at a high level, Ron, can you give him some parliamentary procedures when it comes to that? So, and of course, I'm not speaking for my board. I work for the board, right. And ultimately this will be come from the board's voice of how they want to deal with this. And of course, working with them collaboratively to do that.
Well, I wasn't going to comment on procedures, but I was going to echo the councilman's sentiment that this is off topic and this is not the appropriate forum to discuss this at this time, since we're here to discuss education and not here to discuss matters that are pertaining to buildings that are under contract right now. So we can have that discussion in a separate forum. And I think that would be appropriate.
Well, Ronald, I'm here to discuss working together, and this is working together. This is a surefire way where the school district, if they step up, if you can, and I'm not sure if you can or not, but it's in your hands, I think, at this point, and I don't even know that for sure. So I'm really looking just to get some answers, as to one way or the other, where this is going to proceed. And I'll call Ira. What do you suggest? I call Ira again, or what should I do?
The solicitor would be the best person to comment on the procedures. I'm not privy to being able to say what's the route to do this, because board members vote on the sale of the building, and that is how those are handled. It's a board decision for the disposition of buildings. So I would say talk to the solicitor regarding that, and that we're in the business of trying to have productive relationships and have collaboration, and I'll just leave it at that for this point in time.
Okay, I understand. I just want you all to know that this is adamantly opposed by the neighborhood. You will be hearing about it more and more. I'm not sure where it's at, but I will, I guess, seek my own way and figure out between Ira and I what to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Anything else from members of council before I ask my questions, Mr. Bell?
Yeah, I have one more question. On our meeting yesterday, it was mentioned that one of the core problems with education system, and it's not just a Pittsburgh, but sort of within America, is racism. I mentioned that only because I thought I saw a while back that you all were looking to do implicit bias training to help our teachers and help close the academic achievement gaps, help with proficiency. And so I'm just curious, is that it? Are you actually moving forward with that? And if so, where does that stand?
Yeah, we can definitely look at implicit bias. We actually had 3 rounds of RFPs because ultimately we want to find the right vendor to provide that curriculum to our faculty and staff to begin that work. Thank goodness we finally found that organization who we're going to contract with to deliver that implicit bias training. We're starting out in the fall, beginning to train, and we're using the train the trainer model, because ultimately we want to keep this, once we get this information and this content knowledge, we want to be able to keep it in the district. So we're going to train a cadre of individuals in the district to be implicit bias training, and then begin to further work on training all of our staff around implicit bias training. But that work is coming to fruition. It was thrown off a little bit because, again, we're not going to sell a vendor around the content of implicit bias that wasn't meeting the mark for what we were looking for. But we finally found that, and the work will be moving forward in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So first of all, before I ask a few questions, I really do want to thank Dr. Hamlet and his staff for being here. I want to thank Sylvia representing the board. I will say we invited the entire board. They decided to send Sylvia as their sole representative, which certainly is their right. And but I do want the rest of the board to know that they are welcome to have a conversation with council, and we would love to have their perspectives as well. Can I, Dr. Dwyer, I need some help. So my single focus and my lens, the way I look at this work, is primarily student achievement. I think that it is not the school board's, I don't think it's the school's sole responsibility. I don't think it's the parent's sole responsibility. I don't think it's the church's sole responsibility. I think, or the city's, I think it's all of ours, right? It's shared. There's a community responsibility to properly educate kids. And so my primary focus, I've spent my life, as you know, in education. My entire professional life has been spent in education, and some of it, a significant part of it, in K through 12, out of school time educational programming and other educational programming. But anyway, so what I do have a sense of the various metrics we can use to analyze achievement. I've looked at some of the reports. I guess I'm trying to find an easy layman's way to understand where our kids are at, right? I just think part of the difficulty is that I think people misunderstand where the kids are performing at. I do know that school district has some high performing schools and some high performing children. But I think on average, the African-American children, certainly in high school, many of them are too, in terms of if there was a standardized level of proficiency in grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, they're probably 2 or 3 grade levels behind that. And with COVID, it's, I'm sure, exasperated that achievement. So I'm trying to figure out, and you maybe help me, to get a sort of easy layman's understanding of where our kids are at in terms of grade level of proficiency. I know in the college, for instance, and this is true in all of our school systems, 40% of all the kids who come to CCAC have to have remedial classes. So we know that that problem of being below grade level proficiency is not just a problem in the public schools in Pittsburgh, it's an area-wide problem for many students. And so is that question kind of makes some sense? How do we sort of get our hands, because there's some people, when we say there's an educational emergency, they got, oh no, how could you possibly say that? You're insulting the school district, but really not. There's been a 20-year problem with the opportunity gap. And I don't think it's specifically the school board's problem. I think we have I'll go into that later, but I think we have to be honest that we have this lack of proficiency in multiple grade levels for African-American and Black and Latino children citywide and probably countywide.
I would amend that and say nationwide.
So how do we, I guess my question is, how do I get a sense of where how do we get a sense of where the kids are at? What's the best, this is what you do. So help me figure out a way as I communicate it to a lay audience who may not have, a background in curriculum supervision and, that sort of an evaluation. Where are the kids at? I guess that's really my question. Where kind of consistently, where's a thumbnail rule of where many of these kids are at? Where do we think we're at?
I said at a high level, one of the problems that we have, and number one, we don't want to rely on standardized testing, which normally the majority of the nation does. Why? Because it's mandated by the state, by the federal government to take the PSSA, which is here in Pennsylvania, right? That's one of the measures that we look at annually, because again, that's how our schools are held accountable to student learning. So we can go back to 2019, our last PSSA scores, and look at that. We haven't had that test, again, as I talked about earlier, we haven't had that test for 2 years now. So now we have to look at measures that we have in our district, looking at grades, looking at student attendance, looking at graduation rates, looking at course passing course scores, course grades as well, and looking at different measures to find out how our children are doing. And so again, we're and also we can look at our formative assessment that we give, the NWEA map, which gives us an idea of how where students are performing in correlation to being proficient in the PA core standards. So those are some different measures that we can use. And again, we've been off when it comes to our progress monitoring, where our students are, because of the lack of taking the PSSA. But again, this gives us an opportunity to not just rely on the PSSA, but to really rely on our teachers and our curriculum that we have in front of our students to help those students meet and be proficient and beyond in the PA core standards.
Never mind. Go ahead, Dr. Dwyer. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson.
No, go ahead.
So I do want to mention this. I know we had a hard stop at 3. This is a great conversation. Let's continue with and just end up this question right here, because I don't want to hold up my other staff from and myself and being in the meeting. So, but again, this can be a continuing conversation. This definitely, again, we're talking about collaboration. It shouldn't be one and done. Okay, but go ahead, Dr. Dwyer or Ms. Wilson. I'm sorry.
So Councilman Burgess, or Reverend Burgess, as I understand it, you're asking about how do we get a handle on how all of the students or all the children in the city are doing. We can give context based on the information that we have on the students who are currently enrolled in Pittsburgh Public. But to your point and to the statements that were made about, this isn't just about Pittsburgh Public Schools enrolled students. This is about all the students in the district, all the children in the district, and how we're serving. So that's a more difficult question to answer, and that's something that we have to work with other organizations to find out what they have, so that we can actually wrap our hands around that and wrap our heads around it, because it's not just charter schools; it's also private, parochial, and home schools. So we do have some information about where students are. In the past, the standardized tests that the state has developed for assessing the school account, for providing school accountability, is a measure that we can use to look at where students are on a general basis for performance for the grade level that they were in the prior year. And prior performance tends to predict future performance. So that's a pretty good way to start, and a pretty good conversation starter. But to get the information specifically about where students are, it's got to be something that we work together to identify and put together. So there is not an easy answer for that. If there was, we'd be doing it. We do have assessments, as Dr. Hamlet talked about, the NWEA map assessment, which provides some information about where a student is currently going or currently at, and that's a linked assessment, so we can look across time with that assessment. We also have attendance and grades and things like that. There are comparison problems when you look across private and parochial, public, and charter schools, because there's differences in curriculum, there's differences in requirements for what they're teaching. We align ourselves with the state core, PA core standards. Private schools don't necessarily have to do that. And charter schools use different curriculum, so it's difficult to make some statements like that. But there are some metrics that we could look at that could be consistent across, like attendance, unexcused absences, truancy, things like that, which are also part of the state federal scoreboard that is provided across the entire state, that provides some basic metrics that we can use. There is no tried and true answer.
So I will try to wrap up.
Reverend Burgess, could I just add one thing, since you brought in about community college? I know that the kids coming to community college have traditionally been placed in remedial classes, but we've had students from Pittsburgh Public Schools, from Perry, and some from Westinghouse, and some from the Limes, who've attended classes at community college in the summer. And it was learned that all they needed was some extra tutoring, and the kids finished their classes and they were passing the classes with A's and B's. And it was giving community college the chance to look at what they're doing as students do come in to enroll. So it isn't necessarily that they all need remedial classes. It's just probably they just need some additional monitoring and tutoring, because we've seen a great amount of success. And these kids coming from the 3 high schools I mentioned were from grades 9 through 12. So it wasn't, the seniors, it was kids from across 9 through 12, and they were all being very successful.
Yeah, I meant, when I said that number, it was not specific to the public schools in Pittsburgh. It was all of our incoming students, 40% of them from every school district. So it was not specific.
Yes, okay, thank you.
I won't, again, I'm going to respect your time. That side of it is the side I know a lot about. I was a product. I went to the public schools K through third and then left. And then, so I do want to say this. The responsibility for educating our children belongs to everybody. I think we have to start off by being truthful that our kids are failing. It is truth. They're failing. Our kids are, and I have been blessed to have high achieving children. But on average, the children, Black and brown children in our school system, are failing in terms of they are multiple grade levels behind. They are not proficient in math and English, by and large, and grade appropriate. Now, the question then becomes, I take the position that the school is not the primary problem. That even if the schools were perfect, the kids will still have problems, because the schools are not designed to be the only educational. When you go into kids that are high performing, they're not high performing because the schools alone are high performing. They're high performing because their parents are high performing. They're high performing because their communities are high performing. They have additional academic exposure and instruction beyond the school. And so my argument is going to be, how can we partner together? And so my interest is not so much what happens internally to the school. My interest is, how do we create these additional academic exposure and instruction after school hours, on weekends, during the summer, that's high quality to support what the school is doing and what the family needs to do. That's my own personal interest. Now, I'm not against working to talk about what the schools need to do, but I think that the problem we have is that we don't have a process to engage the entire community collectively to try to educate these kids. And I think that's what's needed. And that's what I am committing myself to do, is how do we create a process where the churches, the parents, the after school program, the summer programming, all the extra school engagement is high quality educational academic achievement primarily, and how do we coordinate that? That's sort of my interest. And so I'm laying my cards on the table. But with that though, I really do deeply want to thank Dr. Hamlet. I've told him privately, I probably need to say this publicly, that I support his leadership and will work with him to the extent he allows me and asks me to support this idea that every student gets proficient in graduation from high school, that we can have 100% proficiency of every child. I think that's a great goal to have, and I'm willing to do that. I want to thank all the members of council who participated. If there is no other, Mr. Lavelle, if you're fine, I think unless there's concluding comments from either Ms. Wilson or Dr. Hamlet, I am ready to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
All right, thank you very much. We are adjourned.